Yeah, anyway, this is an exciting presentation that I'm looking forward to giving. This is brand new, elements of it maybe I've spoken about in other situations, talking about cybersecurity and the practice of information security. But today's topic is vCISO, first 100 days. And I'm putting together some notes and thoughts to share with you all, and hopefully have a conversation about effective planning and program building. So I have been a CISO, and I have been a virtual CISO. And some folks don't necessarily know the difference between those two. And so I'm going to try to unpack that a little bit. But in general, the description I put together for this title slide was that not all organizations have the ability to support a full-time in-house, W-2 CISO. Even I mean, to have top tier security controls and governance, right? Fractional or virtual CISO services, I think, are a way to provide that tactical and strategic guidance that I think every business needs, right? Small, medium, large. Whether you're a multinational global organization or you're 200-person startup. And I think a 100-day plan as a CISO or a virtual CISO working in one of these organizations really helps serve to provide a framework for achieving good significant milestones within your new role. And again, we're maybe talking about a company position that may never existed before, or maybe you're coming in replacing someone, or you're simply the first person to have a security title in the organization. So in this session, I want to talk about preparing a vCISO onboarding plan. I'm going to be using a playbook that Synomi put together, which is in conjunction with, I think, Power PSA, if I remember correctly, that talks about the 5 steps. That's one of the things I wanted to, I guess, opine on and talk about and give my experience, my practical experience of what it's like to do this, because it's a really good document. And again, or not again, but for the first time, and I'll say it again later, all of the links and all of the resources that I'm going to refer to in this presentation are in the slide notes, in the speaker notes, and I will gladly send you a copy of the PowerPoint with all of those notes. So feel free to sit back. You don't necessarily have to do screen captures if you like a particular thing. You can always get it later. But there is a synomi.com first 100 days vCISO steps to success document that kind of inspired me to put this together. So who am I? Who is this person that you've joined for an hour today to hear talk? My name is Mike Wilkes, and I am a senior professional with broad experience designing, building, and supporting infrastructure, high availability, fault tolerant, robust infrastructure in financial services, in the education sector, energy, healthcare, travel, entertainment, and of course, retail. I am a technology evangelist, self-described, for many years on my profile, my resume. But I also now kind of find myself evolving into a risk and resilience champion, and to focus a lot on this concept of resilience and how we make sure that we are authoring and giving birth to and maintaining and supporting, defending fault-tolerant, resilient infrastructure. So some of the logos on this page, I don't have to go through all of them, but one of the feathers in my cap would be running the DevOps team that built and launched Starbucks.com back in 1998. I still have analytics reports on how many hits they got the first day, the first week, and what version of web browsers, referring URLs there were. And it's quite fun and interesting to think. You couldn't, of course, order a latte online back in 1998. These were brochure websites that we built back in the .com bubble. But also at that time, we did have e-commerce and Web 1.0 properties. And so I also gave birth to PlayStation.com for the PS2 in the year 2000. I wrote a book for Cisco Press in 2002 for a certification that no longer exists. It's called Internet Solution Specialist. I created the world's first mobile virtual network operator for Rabobank in 2006 called RaboMobile. I also built Rabobank's direct banks for, the Netherlands, for Belgium, for Ireland, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. And that all ran out of infrastructure that we designed and supported when I was working in Holland for about 11 years. And what else? I also designed their trading floor in Utrecht in 2011. Let's see. Then I moved back to the US in 2013 and ran the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the CME Group's enterprise server platform, which was around 10,000 servers and $1 quadrillion, quadrillion dollars in contracts traded back in 2014. I was also the head of DevOps, enterprise architecture, and InfoSec at Marvel. I like to joke it was my job to keep Iron Man safe. And if anyone's seen me speak before, I use that joke every time because it's a cool tagline and it's definitely true and fun. I had a lot of great stories and experiences working at Marvel, working for the Empire, given that Disney bought Marvel. Disney bought Marvel and Star Wars, of course, franchises many years ago. I'm an adjunct professor teaching NYU, and this fall I'm actually picking up a couple of classes. I'm teaching at Columbia University in IT risk management and strategic communications. And then the last thing I like to mention is my membership in the World Economic Forum working groups. I was nominated in 2020 as a technology pioneer, and I've worked on oil and gas, quantum security, and advanced manufacturing working groups. Writing white papers and studies and things like that. So let's see, everything should be good to continue. All right, so here's our agenda. Becoming CISOs and vCISOs. So I want to put this into context before I dive into what should you do for your first 100 days. And I definitely recommend that you should bring your own onboarding plan and your first 100-day plan to your interviews for the job. To show that you're committed, that you're thinking like the role, like the leader that they need, and that you have some insights potentially to bring. And you want to then socialize that with all the stakeholders and have them have a piece in designing it and evolving it into what it becomes. But I've done this for at least 3 of my CISO roles, right, where I bring the deck to the interview and I talk about what I think they need. And of course, I do research on the company ahead of time. But anyway, so talking about what is a CISO, what is a fractional CISO, what is a virtual CISO, how do we become them, what are the certifications, things like that. Then I'll dive into the plan, right, the 5 steps according to this playbook that Cynomi put together, which is a platform, if you're not aware of it, for fractional CISOs. And then, of course, executing the work. I'll talk a little bit about my first 100 days as a fractional CISO for Lark.com, which was a healthcare startup based in California that I worked in for a while, and which I delivered this plan and I executed on it, and I have stories to tell and share with you about it. And then, of course, measurement, right? Evaluating the outcomes of that. What are your KPIs and OKRs? So I just throw out a couple of those at the end before we can do some Q&A and talk about any questions you might have about fractional CISO work or CISO work in general. So this, like I said, presentation is intended to share some of my experience as a fractional CISO. But again, I want to put it into the larger context and describe the journey and not just the destination. So I'd like to thank the folks at Cynomi for publishing the playbook and with Power PSA, because they're the ones, I think, that gave it a lot of substance and interesting content. And the link to that, of course, is in the slides. All right, so becoming CISOs and vCISOs. This section warrants its own submenu, right? So I'm going to talk about slings and arrows, aka Shakespeare, Hamlet, right? The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. We don't see much outrageous fortune as CISOs and virtual CISOs, but we definitely see the slings and arrows. And I'm going to talk about the various cybersecurity certifications that exist. There are too many in my mind. And I'll introduce the idea of a CISO development lifecycle, so the CDLC. And I'm going to talk about various types of CISOs as categorized by me and others into buckets and categories and types. And then I'll finish off this section with the nature of our product as information security professionals. And I believe that that is the avoidance of harm. So we're not there to, push hardware or software or paper and policy. We're there to have an outcome, where we stop bad things from happening. And then I have a reference in the slides. I'll throw it into the chat as well if you want to bookmark it now, which is that I wrote a piece to be CISO or not to be CISO. So again, it's the Hamlet reference, to be or not to be. And in that, I talk a little bit about some of the considerations that go into doing this kind of work. All right, so slings and arrows. The average CISO tenure is 18 to 26 months. Other C-suite roles are around 4.9 years on average. Why is that? Because I think CISOs are considered fungible, because I think we're considered cannon fodder in the executive, space, thrown under the bus. There have been some improvements recently in SEC's case against Tim Brown and SolarWinds. Most of those charges and assertions have been thrown out. That's if I understand correctly. But it still had a chilling effect, I think, on the space. And I don't see the trend getting better yet. I don't see longer tenures happening. There's an extraordinarily broad list of responsibilities that you have to have as a CISO or a fractional CISO. You need to be knowledgeable about policy. You need to be able to handle and manage incident response. You need to understand compliance and regulatory frameworks in different jurisdictions. You have to be able to go toe-to-toe with engineers and developers talking about the technology itself. You need to have great partnership and chops in the legal area for reviewing contracts, for example. And of course, partnering with HR, there's all sorts of things that have to be done there on an insider risk program and how do you surveil anomalous behaviors without, being like George Orwell's Big Brother. And so I think there's a lot of challenges there, of course, in these skills, hard and soft, that are needed. I think talent acquisition and interview panels are often unable to distinguish between imposters and people with real skills. And that is a challenge, especially when they have entry-level positions in the field for InfoSec. And the job description says, entry-level, but you need to have 5 years of experience. Those are two mutually incompatible statements. If it is an entry-level position, you should be training the person on how to do it and hiring for DNA or for attitude, right? The ability to learn, ability to document, the interest to learn how to script and automate things. These are the skills that you should be interviewing for, not 5 years of resume experience for an entry-level position. And so that causes a pipeline problem, obviously. And I think the velocity of attacks, everyone talks about this, and ChatGPT can put together a lovely sentence for you about it. But in my words, my own authentic human words, velocity of attacks and exposures to risk is significant. And that is part of the slings and arrows that we face. Why? Because we're dealing with organized crime, we're dealing with nation states, we're dealing with bored teenagers. And I'll talk more about those bored teenagers in a minute. Is bullet 3 true for CISOs as well? Yeah, definitely. Talent acquisition. If I want to really paint an ugly, picture, a pessimistic picture of it, I would say that some of these resumes that are going in for CISO jobs are fiction. And I would say that some of the job descriptions themselves are just willy-nilly copy paste. And so what they actually need you to do and what they say in the job description are completely different. So there's like 3 fictions going on here, right? There's what you actually need to do, which is unpublished and undocumented until you start the job or go through the interview panel sequence. And then they're like, oh, what you really just need is a director of security operations. You don't need a CISO. And so I think it's useful to make sure that we distinguish, that CISO is sort of like this broad set and depth of skills and experiences that are hard skills, technical skills, and also soft skills, the ability to be a business leader and a manager. And I'll get into that. And there may be some difference of opinion, and that's fine. But I do think that we're not all cut from the same cloth, meaning the CISO for NASA is going to have a totally different skill set and requirements for a CISO for like a 20-person Web 3.0 distributed finance startup, right? Totally different attack surface, totally different qualifications to do the job, totally different set of supply chain risk, third-party risk, vendors, things like that. Let's see, what else? High accountability and event-driven stress. So health and wellness and coping strategies are completely inadequate for most CISOs. And I wrote a piece on this. I'll have to surface it again later, where I talk about CISO health and wellness and how we come up with coping strategies that are not just drinking an old-fashioned every chance we get at a vendor dinner, or having other types of medical modifications to our stress levels and to our routine, because it's often, like I said, event driven. You don't have the luxury of just saying, okay, we only have quarterly reporting 4 times a year if you're in finance. Event-driven stress means someone just clicked on an email, an anomalous event occurred, quarantine of the devices occurred, lockout of that user account, and then now you have to light up a conference call and investigate, right? And that can happen anytime. And then lastly, the demands for exceptional communication and persuasion skills, because I like to think of a CISO as a diplomat. We don't have direct reports in the numbers like other, leadership do, or indirect reports even, right? There's a cascading number of reports that people have. Maybe if you're John Scamone and you're the chief security officer for Dell, and you have 60 CISOs reporting to you, then yeah, maybe you do actually have a lot of direct reports. But in general, you have to be able to influence a non-technical audience of executives and board directors. And again, those are the soft skills that I'll talk a little bit more about in a couple of the other slides. But the next piece I wanted to throw up was this quote from Jen Easterly of CISA. Being a CISO right now is like standing on lava islands while juggling radioactive lightsabers. Of course, that's probably a lovely prompt for a generative image in AI, but I didn't take the initiative to go and create that image and pop it in here. Next up, slings and arrows. I wanted to talk about the CISO mind map. So I wanted to shout out to Renee Gutman, a fellow presenter, speaker, CISO, and thought leader, who has previously been the CISO at Coca-Cola, Time Warner, and I think Royal Caribbean, if I remember correctly as well. We've spoken together on panels, and she recommended when I showed her some of my slides, in prep for this, she recommended that I include this, and so I wanted to thank her for that. So there is this thing called the CISO mind map. What do InfoSec professionals really do? It was started in 2012 by Rafiq Rabin, and it was updated regularly to reflect changes, adds and remove things, from it, based on surveys, research, interviews, and targeted LinkedIn discussions. And I think it's important was that if you look on this visual here, some of the text that's in red is new, meaning new areas of responsibility that have popped up. And this particular version, I think, was updated on March 31st, 2024. And I think it'll be valid for a while and then be reviewed and updated, again with, and I've got a link to the high resolution PDF and the CISO mind map homepage in the slide notes. So I'll give you a QR code at the end. You can use to just shoot me a mail to reference request again. All right, so becoming CISOs and vCISOs, one thinks of cybersecurity certifications and different paths that one can take to becoming an information security leader and professional, and eventually manager and director, VP, SVP, and then CISO. So there are certain domains that one could approach this sort of role, whether it's, again, fractional in time or full-time W-2. And you could come from the communication and network security path. You could come from identity and access management as a specialization, right? You're basically going to become a subject matter expert on one of these areas before you move into mastering or attempting to master all of them. Security architecture and engineering is a focus and a trajectory. Asset security, think about endpoint management, right? As well as software assets and human assets, actually. Security and risk management, these are more enterprise risk and IT risk management paths. And then, of course, you have security assessment and testing, red team exercises, pen testing, tabletops, other types of exercises that are a part of thinking about security and testing your knowledge within the organization of your own policies and procedures. And then, of course, there's software security, AppSec, as well as reverse engineering, malware, security operations, incident response, things like that. But one of the first things, or one of the many things that I tell to my NYU students, and soon this fall Columbia students, when talking about certifications and higher education credentials, right? Because they're all getting a master's degree, in cybersecurity, for example, or getting a master's degree in enterprise risk management. And I like to point out the first person to receive a PhD was handed it by someone who didn't have one. And the point being that I think certifications are meant to be proxies for experience and knowledge, demonstrable, quantified, peer-reviewed kind of thing. But I'm rather more of a heretical thinker, I guess, on this concept. And I believe that there are two kinds of people in cybersecurity: qualified and certified, with not a lot of Venn diagram overlap between the two. We wish it were true. Maybe in the future it will be. But at the moment, I feel like there's tons of people with lots of abbreviations after their name that know jack about security, right? When I worked at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, I was not in information security. I was in the enterprise server and operations teams. And I talked to the folks in GIS, right? global information security. And that was like a 5-headed hydra, and each head of the hydra of these different work streams within it, the team didn't trust each other, didn't communicate with each other. They're all ultra paranoid, some of them obsessive compulsive in their focus on what they do. And I gained the nickname the GIS Whisperer, because I was able to talk to all 5 heads of the Hydra and to collaborate with them and to talk about those things and to take some of the stuff off their plate and to bring it into the enterprise server platform team, like vulnerability management tier 1, meaning we patched and did all the vulnerability management for our 10,000 servers as a team. And then we handed it over to the InfoSec, and GIS to be the second set of eyes, because I feel that GIS and InfoSec as the first set of eyes was uninformed. When I joined, I remember being given like a 14,000 page PDF, which was like the tenable scan results vulnerabilities. And I started looking through it and I realized that there was a lot of duplicates. And I said, well, why don't you sort by asset instead of by vulnerability? Because you're going to have all these duplicate entries. And they're like, what? That kind of passed over their head, this question. And I was like, well, you realize that a server, or an asset can have more than one IP address, and you're sorting these by IP addresses. And they were like, I don't understand. And so for me, the analogy here is a sailor stepping onto a boat and going out to sea. That sailor needs to know how to find the North Star, right? That's a fundamental. And I think in cybersecurity, networking and understanding of how computers and the internet work is a bit of a fundamental. And so I ask people on interview panels, for team, for my headcount, for an InfoSec role, or for someone else for a DevOps, or I even ask this question of VPs of engineering when I'm interviewing them, because I want to bring a knowledge of their understanding. I want to understand their knowledge of technology. And so I'll ask them, what's the difference between TCP and UDP? And if they know that, then I'll ask them to drill down and describe the TCP 3-way handshake. These are fundamentals, right? These are not esoteric edge case things. And yes, you can have people that are not technical, that are in adjacent roles like project managers and QA. But in general, I think everyone ought to know, like every sailor on a ship, how to find the North Star. It's just a fundamental tenet of how computers and the internet work and the basics of the mechanics of technology. So anyway, what else? So yeah, like I said, that's a little bit of a heretical view for a professor, I guess, of cybersecurity who has a couple of certifications I picked up over the years, but not a lot. And I don't herald them as important. And shown here in my graphic is a historical visualization of the 7 bridges of Königsberg problem. Which route will allow someone to cross all 7 bridges without crossing any of them more than once? So your cybersecurity path, you could think of these as like 7 bridges, right? 2, or in this case, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, I think, right? 8 different cybersecurity domains that you could move into a CISO position from eventually. Think of that. Don't think of it as 7 bridges, a Königsberg problem. You can cross these bridges more than once. You can go into them, come out of them, but it's a fun visual that I thought I would share for this discussion. Now here is the piece. This is a cybersecurity certification roadmap. So this has the 1, 2, 3, 4. This has the 8 domains I just mentioned, and there's this brilliant page, that I am sharing here by someone whose name is Paul Jeremy. He created it. I at least captured this back in August of 2022, but he's received a lot of feedback about it. He's updated it. I believe this shows 473 certifications. Yep, as of January. And of January 2023. So there's probably some more. But you can see like the CISSP spans several of these domains, right? And on the actual link on this roadmap that he's created, and I'll share that immediately in case you don't have time to get the slides later. Each one is a hyperlink that takes you to like a pop-up and a web page about it, right? And shows you how much it costs and what are the requirements and things like that. Anyway, so there's tons and tons of certifications. And again, most of them are meaningless. I would just hire people based on their qualifications, aka they've done work, they know what they're talking about, they play with computers at home in their spare time, they have that spark, right? They have that interest. Because I think you need that in this difficult field to survive and sustain your energy, enthusiasm, and ability, to avoid harm, to do good things, right? Build good architectures, document good process, reflect on and improve that process when bad things happen. So becoming CISOs, here's my sort of fun analogy that I'm introducing here, this sort of life cycle. And because it's not like you just become a CISO and you're suddenly, somebody like a king or a queen takes a sword and taps you on each shoulder and says, "You are now Sir Michael, the CISO of, blah, blah, blah." It's a life cycle. And in my mind, there's I think, yeah, four areas that sort of define the stages of this life cycle. First one is to aspire and become a CISO. The second one is to grow and broaden your skills. All right, to have that sort of multi-domain knowledge that we're talking about, which I'll drill down into on another slide. Then after that, you need to achieve and create teams and a legacy, because it's not about what you accomplish. It's about how many CISOs you've given birth to, how many people you've mentored, how many people you've brought into the field, how many people you kept from leaving the field, right? Because you helped them identify their intrinsic desire and interest, and maybe leave, endpoint security and go into, other areas or other specializations, because that's more, their interest, their real desire. Then finally, the fourth phase, reflect and give back to the community. And that's where I am right now. I'm in the fourth phase, right? I've been a CISO, I've broadened my skills, I've created teams and legacy, and now I'm teaching and, talking and sharing that information with others. So as with so many things, there's a life cycle to becoming a CISO, progressing through it as a security leader. I'd also want to reference, and I'll get to some lovely slides from this talk in a minute as well. Andy Ellis had a great talk at a breakfast meeting on the 49th floor of Rockefeller Center here in New York at the Deloitte offices. And I'll show you a picture of that boardroom because it's beautiful, discussing life after CISO. Which I'll, like I said, touch on in a few minutes, but there is a life after CISO. And you could always take a sabbatical, teach, write a book, and then come back and practice again later. But that's sort of jumping back into the life cycle again. What else? So aspire and become, the very first phrase. Paths to CISO are multitudinous and varied, as I hopefully indicated with all those certifications and the different domains. Becoming or being named a CISO is a catch-22 situation, right? You need the title in order to get the title. When I applied for CISO roles in the past, they want to know that you've been a CISO for 4 or 5 years. How do you get that first, breakthrough job position? There's different techniques for it. One of which is, to be a deputy CISO or to be a GRC VP or something, and then head into it and get it for the first time. But you have to find an organization that's willing to hire a CISO that hasn't sort of had the title before, and those are far and few between. CISO accolades and awards, these are kind of sus, right? Like in Among Us, like the game, Suspicious, right? These are kind of sus in general, these accolades and awards. They may work for you and for your marketing department, but in general, the population of practicing qualified InfoSec professionals don't really go after the showboating limelight of having awards, being top this, top that. Ex post facto CISO. So this is a technique of granting yourself the title of CISO when you realize that you were the CISO, but you didn't have the title. And this is what happened with me. When I was at Marvel, I was hired originally to be the head of DevOps and enterprise architecture. And then eventually I was given InfoSec, and I reported to the CIO, and my team reported to me. So there was no chief information security officer above me. And so I anointed myself CISO, a couple of years after, and just started saying I was the chief information, I was the de facto chief information security officer, if not in title. Technically, I was like the director of information security. But again, there was no CISO that I reported to, and there was no one above me that had a security role, or responsibility. And so I sort of granted myself the title. So that's how I kind of backed into it for that first one. And then subsequently, and it's not really fake it till you make it, right? This is just more use of words and storytelling. And then, of course, deputy CISOs and BISOs, right? Business information security officers. There are certainly pre-CISO concepts here that we can think about. And if we go back to that sort of butterfly life cycle image, you can think of the adult butterfly, right? Flavor. You're a full-fledged butterfly, even if you're not broad in all of your skills and deep in hard and soft skills. But like I said, these roles, deputy CISO roles and business information security officer roles, which are more like business liaisons with a specific subset of responsibilities within an organization. If I remember correctly, Bank of America has something like 11 BISOs. But my main wish for thinking about this point along the journey, right, of CISO development lifecycle, is to make sure that you truly want to have the role in all of its ignominy and discomfort. Shown here, deception in nature. So this is a caterpillar that looks like a snake. So I have a whole bit and lecture that I do in some of my NYU courses on deception technology and InfoSec, but I don't have time to dive into that here, but I just wanted to share that little visual for you here that there are useful ways to protect your organization by mimicking biological things like deception. All right. So the CISO development lifecycle, let's move on now to the grow and broaden phase. So a CISO is a business leader, needs to be acting like a business leader, aka forget all of your technical chops and be a manager, right? And there's a good quote that comes up in a minute that I'll share with you about that. You need to be a cheerleader. You need to bring others into a happy space and encourage them for their good work, whether they're on your team or not. Especially it's useful to cheerlead security work being done, champions of InfoSec in engineering or in QA, right, that are automating things, that are bringing in new tools, that are improving the process. You need to be a salesperson. You need to help go out and sell your organization to clients. When I was the CISO at Security Scorecard, that was an explicit part of my role. And oftentimes people would think, oh, you're not a real CISO now anymore. You've gone to the dark side, they say. But being a vendor CISO does not mean that you've not got responsibilities. At least in my case, I certainly had responsibilities to build and run an actual information security program. But we'll talk about fractional, or what are they called? Field CISOs, right? Or marketing CISOs in a minute. You have to be a warfighter, right? You have to be a general. You have to do incident response. You have to be calm and cool and collected and understand that the war is happening. It's happening every day. It's just not like a kinetic engagement where you can see, explosions and see the front lines. Identity is the new perimeter. Breaches are happening all the time. We have to assume compromise. So we're in a constant batten the hatches state of readiness. You have to be an attorney. You have to understand law. You have to understand policy. You have to be a private investigator to do incident response, to do insider threat investigations. You have to be a diplomat, as I mentioned. You have to influence the whole world, the entire org chart. CISOs have a relationship with every single department. And some of them, like I said, HR and legal, you have to almost be joined at the hip if you want to do it well. You have to be a technologist, of course. I can't erase that from this. I believe that you cannot be a good CISO without having some knowledge and depth on technology. You don't have to have built computers as a hobby, gaming machines or something. And you don't have to be having a soldering iron, on your desk, that you've used to, fix and repair things, right? But you do need to have a sense of craftsmanship and understanding of techne, the Greek word behind technology, and to have an excellence about it. Then, of course, I think everyone should be a teacher because we're starting to grow our team and do developments of their skills and abilities. And we have to be innovators. We have to adopt new technology and get good at stuff pretty quick, like understanding AI and the risks that AI brings to the world of cybersecurity and business risk. And then, of course, here, maybe I'm going to get controversial again, but I did put this together to sort of show and quantify a little bit about how hard it is to be a good CISO, to be well-rounded and to be successful. So CISO should be drawn from that small pool of talent, right, that has the breadth and depth as well as the hard and soft skills. So some LinkedIn Sales Navigator work I did, 32,000 CISOs globally, people with the title at least. I'd say around, well, not say, I filtered that to 12,000 globally who have a tenure of greater than 2 years. So that's pretty small, right? People are getting asked to move on pretty frequently. Within North America, as a geo restriction filter, I count 9,000 CISOs in Sales Navigator and LinkedIn. And about only 1,500 of them are active on LinkedIn. And again, active on LinkedIn doesn't necessarily mean that you're a showboat, looking for rewards and stuff. But it does mean that you're participating in the communication and community of practice. And that's me. I'm one of those 1,500. Then, of course, of those 9,000, I would say maybe 50% are probably aspirational, meaning they've never actually really done the job. But they put the label on their title and they've described some of their prior work as being a CISO. But it may only have been titled, like I said, at the director or VP or manager level, if it was in a small organization or even in some large enterprises. So that puts the number down to around 4,500 CISOs in North America. And then and here's the controversial part, half of those are imposters, meaning they're not actually CISOs. They somehow convinced and interviewed well and told stories and maybe had a lot of letters after their name for certifications. And that just means you're good at taking tests. That doesn't necessarily mean you're good at the job. And there's some self-admitted imposters. It's not imposter syndrome, where you think you may not be good enough for the job. And that happens to everyone, not just people of color and women. White males have imposter syndrome as well. I'm here to tell you that sometimes we wake up and we too feel, even though we're sort of the apex, in this field, and it shouldn't be that way. Not everyone should be a white male to be a CISO. I try to bring as much diversity through my teaching and through my mentoring of people I've worked with. A couple of my students, in one class at NYU, I brought them in to be teaching assistants for a summer course where I had over 100 students of business, returning adult students, in the Cyber Fellows program at NYU. And they were both women and they were both excellent. And I selected them for their excellence. But I also wanted to make sure that I gave them this opportunity and didn't just choose someone that maybe I was more comfortable working with, that was going to be more deferential, perhaps, right? These were strong-willed, intelligent women. And we need that in this space. But anyway, that's a little bit about the potentially controversial assertion that 50% of CISOs are imposters, and not just feeling imposter syndrome from time to time. So those are some queries I made on LinkedIn. Now let's go to the achieve and create phase. So in this case, I think some of the characteristics of this part of the development lifecycle is when you switch from talking, you switch to talking about us and we, and not me and I. Right? It's about the team. It's about the project. It's about the process. It's about the legacy. It's about setting up something that survives your departure, whether it's incorrectly due to someone clicking on an email and they decide to fire the CISO, which happens a lot, or other reasons for moving on. And of course, you need, in this phase, you need to be able to move the locus of debate. So locus means area, right? So if you have a point and then you have a radius around it, the locus is all the area within the radius of the circle. And sometimes, not sometimes, many times, we need to shift the locus of debate away from, the security team is responsible for security to, guess what? Everyone is responsible for security. We have the word in our title, but everyone needs to be protecting the organization, thinking about risk, being skeptical about calls to action from emails that look like they're CEO saying, I need you to wire transfer $25 million to the Cayman Islands, now. And of course, you need to transform the business, the mindset of the business. You need to impact and transform the DNA of the business. That's what I mean by achieve and create, teams and a legacy, because it's more about what survives, not during your tenure as CISO, but what survives the years after, the imprint that you have on the organization. And I believe very strongly that you need to infect others with the instinct to document. Documentation is always one of my evergreen work streams that I focus on. And I try to infect everyone with the instinct to document. Why? Because it makes incident response better. It makes knowledge transfer better. It makes onboarding and cross-training easier. And it's really helpful to have good documentation for all sorts of the process and responsibilities of security professionals. You need to craft a healthy environment, of course, not toxic. You need to be having as much transparency as possible. You can't be transparent about everything, especially when you're told that you're about to riff, 30 people, on the coming Friday. But obviously, after that happens, you should be as transparent as you can about the why and how the decisions are made, so that people don't invent their own reasons, because these fictions that they come up with are worse than the truth. Then I like to leave breadcrumbs, as I call it, for those who come after us. I believe that when you're creating legacy, you're documenting so that people don't have to struggle 6 months to 12 months after you're gone to say, what was the decision? How was it taken? Was it documented? What were the criteria that were used, right? Shown here is Changi Airport Butterfly Garden in Singapore on a visit where I was presenting at GovWare for the Singapore International Cyber Week in 2022. So I use some proprietary real-world images here. We as CISOs should be like butterflies, and have nutrients and be beautiful, but also contribute to the whole ecosystem of the food cycle and pollination and other types of healthy, sustainable environmental type concepts. Let's see, how am I doing on slides? I'm on 14. I'm gonna have to step it up a little bit. All right, reflect and give back. Take a sabbatical, mentor new talent, succession planning, teaching the next generation, writing a book, working abroad, and helping improve cybersecurity in Costa Rica or in Mexico or in Japan or in other countries. And then, of course, board of directors is an option to give back. So shown here is a Gen AI image of a gray-haired, bearded InfoSec professional surrounded by animals of threat intelligence, like pandas, tigers, spiders, and bears. So this is a fun generated image that I used. Now, of course, this is an impossible chessboard, right? Because there's like a piece on like almost every square, right? But anyway, AI always makes images that knows, hey, chess pieces need to be on a chessboard, but it doesn't know anything about what a chess piece is or how the game of chess is played per se in creating this visual. It just knows that these are associated assets, and images. Becoming CISOs, life after CISO. So who wouldn't want to earn a few extra bucks for retirement and serve as board director for a publicly traded company, right? Who wouldn't want to get paid 200,000? I don't know. Maybe people get paid more, maybe less. I haven't achieved this myself yet. But just to attend 4 meetings a year, right? Quarterly board meetings, where everyone's doting on your every need and opinion and listening with rapt attention to your every word. So this is the picture I took of the boardroom at Deloitte's 49th floor of the Rockefeller Center. And this is super ultra high tech. It's got like embedded, induction chargers for your cell phone. It's got microphones. It's got slide presentations, coffee warmers, everything you might want. Beautiful chairs, beautiful view of the city. And this is the talk, a couple of pictures I took from Andy Ellis's talk about life after CISO. So marketing CISO, become a board director, become a venture capitalist, become a virtual CISO, right? Become a pundit, or pivot, become a CTO or a CIO, and be potentially cross-titled, double entitled. It's not as easy as it looks or sounds, though, of course, this life after CISO. Some of the options that Andy Ellis discussed at this event, presented by YL Ventures, was that I was fortunate enough to attend this event. And then he explains that he doesn't want to have 7 jobs, right? And if you look at his LinkedIn profile, you'll see there's more than that, right? All of his advisory roles are listed there as well. It just sort of works out that way for him in his post-CISO life. He was the chief security officer for Akamai for 9 years, and he had been with the company for 20 years overall. But he started out, according to his LinkedIn profile, as an assistant innkeeper and wine steward at the Arlington Inn. So go figure. But anyway, I'll note that I had to step out after his talk to speak with a writer for a news site that wanted my opinion on artificial intelligence. So I guess I've ascended to the pundit role, but remember that usually doesn't actually pay. It's just for fun and glory. And of course, to communicate to the masses of people that want to know things. I was interviewed for CrowdStrike, for example, on public radio the morning it happened on July 19th. People hear about a good person that can wrap things up, come up with analogies and metaphors. So different types of CISOs, 2, 6, 10, and then something I call CISOs and dragons. So there are many kinds of CISOs. 2 types of CISOs I've often explained: pre-breach and post-breach. You don't become a post-breach until you've lived through it. And pre-breach CISOs are always about the tools, and post-breach CISOs are always about people and process, because they know that tools will always fail them. So I always like to list it: people, process, and tools, and then that order. And there's a tech target, what type of CISO are you, and company fit, that matters, that we can look at, or you can look at later. The 6 different types of CISOs, this comes from a tech target article that I mentioned. There's, in their mind and analysis, there's the transformational CISO, there's the post-breach CISO. In this case, they're not talking about just anyone that's been through a breach. They're talking about the very specific CISO who comes in after a breach at a company. And I remember somebody telling a story about how their CISO was paid $800,000 a year. They had a breach, they got fired. The second person to come in to take their job got paid like 1.2 million. It's nice to be the post-breach CISO, right? And to get that 1.2 million, because you have the same responsibilities and risk as the person that was only getting paid $800K. Then there's a tactical and operational expert CISO who comes, again, from a very hands-on operations background. Then you have your compliance and risk guru CISO, who maybe plays with Microsoft Word and Word documents, compliance policy statements and things like that their whole life. Then you might have a steady state CISO, who's somebody who's just bench warmer, keep the lights on, everything's functioning well. You don't need to be, the radical, informational sort of evangelist of, a cult of personality to come in and transform a company has a bad security. It's just, sort of humdrum, run of the mill kind of work. And then of course there's this customer facing evangelist CISO, which is more like a field CISO. We can talk about that. Then I also have Helen Patton, who's an excellent CISO, and she's also self-described here as author, board member, teacher, and she has a post where she talked about enterprise CISO, public company, enterprise CISO, private company, different flavors, product-based CISO or a CISO of a product-based company versus services, of course, a startup CISO, totally different kind of skill set, business unit CISO, aka BISO, enterprise CISO for the government or public sector, completely different mission-based because you're only going to get paid like 100, 120,000 a year. Virtual CISO, of course, can be varying amounts, and I think that's just fractional. I think it's the same, but she lists them differently here. CISO in name only, CINO, I guess that's implied by like Rhino, right? Republican in name only kind of stuff. And then of course, field CISO. The other thing I wanted to mention before I use up all the time for my slides and don't leave anything for Q&A, is this experimental thing that I'm still developing. So if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, you have this 3x3 alignment grid. There's 2 axes, right, with neutral in the middle. It allows for 9 alignments in combination. So if you think about Lord of the Rings, for example, it's pretty easy to agree on who's good and who's evil, right? But in the modern real world, aka not Lord of the Rings, say maybe also in a recent Dune movie, we see much more complex reality and characters and character alignment. And it's not so easy. It's not so black and white. But I was annoyed by all these character alignments always featuring male characters, right? Upper left-hand corner is always Superman. Lower right-hand corner is always the Joker, right? Chaotic evil. And they're mostly male, right? So I asked around and I couldn't find any good female grids of these D&D, and so a friend of mine who's very rich in the knowledge of Star Wars came up with this one. So top left, you have Padme Amidala, then you have Ahsoka Tano in the middle, and then Leia Organa solo. So she is technically chaotic good, right? She does crazy stuff, but in a good way. Then you have Satine Kryze, the daughter, Bo-Katan Kryze. Then you have, lower left, you have Deidre Marrow, Townsend, and then someone I don't know, Asajj Ventress. Deidre is from the TV show Andor, and so she's sort of like a compliance Nazi, you might say, right? So she is evil because she's working for the Empire, the bad Empire, but she loves the rules and loves applying the rules, and that's one of her character traits. And Bo-Katan is from the TV show The Mandalorian. So here is my work in progress on how do we fill in this grid with CISOs? Can we find examples of CISOs that fit into these categories? Like, for example, the whistleblower Mudge, right? Who was the CISO at Twitter before it fell apart and got manhandled by Elon Musk. Lawful good, right? He gave up several $1 million severance package in order to be a whistleblower and file his SEC filing about all the bad practices happening there. And then maybe neutral good would be some kind of insufferable optimist. And then the chaotic good would be some kind of like Zen master who does crazy stuff and you don't know why, but it always works out in the end. Anyway, so these are some of the things that I was trying to play around with. Lower right-hand corner would be like a snake oil, fear, uncertainty, and doubt CISO, whereas 100% false alarm amplifier, right? Just saying, oh, the sky is falling all the time, causing chaos, not causing improvements in security, and just using fear, to try to drive change. And it may not be change in a good direction. It may actually be subconsciously, undermining, strong security practices. But anyway, I think we as complex humans, we can't really should not be divided into simple dichotomies like male, female, good or evil. And really, even this 3x3 grid isn't good enough. There's one of this where it shows that Batman is all of these things. And it shows a scene from all of these different Batman movies or comics that shows that we're all capable of each of these character alignment capabilities and capacities. So for avoidance of harm, this is the great quote that I want to share from Greg Wood, former SVP of Technology and Risk Management at Walt Disney. He gave me permission to quote him on this. As managers, we execute a plan. As leaders, we manage scarcity. And as executives, we manage ambiguity. Now, there's a lot of ambiguity that happens in cybersecurity and incident response with threat actors, nation states, and like I said, bored teenagers hacking into NVIDIA just for the lulls. So technology, is easily complexified, I guess. And so these are the things we have to exonerate and personify. And these are part of the things I think that lead to a good outcome, right? The avoidance of harm. The other quote I want to share was from Bob Lord, who is now a special advisor to CISA. And he said something at the Black Hat 2020, I think it was, no, it was actually in an article before Black Hat 2021 when I met him. He says, talking to the board is the easy part. Adding value to their thinking is what is hard. And for me, that captures the biggest challenge that CISOs have right now. How do we add value to their thinking about risk without expecting them to turn into technologists and cybersecurity experts, because we really can't expect that. Let's see, what do we have up in the chat? Really about how they use power. Yeah, that could be part of the grid, if that's what you're referring to, Paul. All right, so here we are. I'm going to go through this quickly because you can read this later. The 5-step plan for your first 100 days as a CISO: research, days 0 to 30, understand, days 0 to 45, prioritize, days 15 to 60, execute, that's days 30 to 80, and then report, days 45 to 100. But I'll also caveat this a little bit and say these work streams are not actually executed sequentially. You will actually engage in all of them at once. So what is the current state? Research. Meet the stakeholders, talk to management, meet the IT security team, show them your roadmap, show them your onboarding plan, have them add items to it, have them help you prioritize it. Get access to tools, get your data, get all the relevant systems you need. Analyze the existing infrastructure, obtain and understand network diagrams, data flow diagrams, have people create them if they don't exist. So what is your current state, right? This is, again, documentation, compliance, and then what is the actual technique of the company? Because there could be a big delta between what they publish in their documentation and what they actually do, right? They may say that we have, MFA everywhere, but they don't. And that could turn into an audit finding, right? They might have MFA on a few critical systems, but not everywhere. Also, current state of the business objectives and what is the risk appetite. So in this case, additional steps in this research period: review past security incidents and responses, conduct threat intelligence research to see who's targeting your company, who's targeting your industry. There are ways to access this information. Understand the existing vendor management process and, of course, improve it as needed. Review customer contracts with legal and understand the software development lifecycle and where you can potentially inject some automation to make life easier for the developers and for operations and for you as a security person. So try to automate some of this security stuff in the release management and SCLC. And that way it's a win-win, right? Security gets better and you're not adding extra work into those people's queue. Then understand period. So build a comprehensive and coherent view of the company. Conduct a security risk assessment, internal. And you, with your fresh eyes, you're not jaded, by someone that's been there many years. So do that, in your first 100 days. Create a clear picture of the maturity and posture of the organization. Show the current security posture and gaps to management. Communicate. Identify short-term, long-term needs. Identify business needs. Make sure the business needs are aligned with the security needs. People always talk about security awareness training and how we go out and teach people how to make strong passwords and not to click on emails. I often think, and I heard this at a boutique conference here in New York a few years ago, we actually need business awareness training for InfoSec folks, right? We need to have people go in and teach us how the business works so that we're not putting up, artificial friction and roadblocks on other people's plans to implement features and functionality just because, it hasn't been reviewed by the security team yet. And then, of course, examine the use of automation. That's where you're going to really win for the users, for the developers, and for the business. Prioritize, draft and plan an InfoSec roadmap. Define your short, midterm, long-term goals. Here's a 3x3 typical matrix. I put all of my different work streams into corners for every company, and every quarter we work on moving one of these out of the upper right-hand corner, right? Because you want to get rid of your high impact, high likelihood events. Create a risk register, right? Plan budgets and resources. You wouldn't believe how many companies operate without a risk register. And so how do you escalate things that are beyond your pay grade, right? For decisions by the senior team or by the board. And again, the board will only pay attention to a risk on the risk register if it'll exist for more than 2 quarters. So any risk that's going to go away in a space of 3 months is going to be almost irrelevant to the board, right? Because their decision won't even take place because it's going to show up, and then the next quarterly meeting, it's not going to be there anymore. You might want to flag it as a win if it was super high, visibility and impact. But in general, most risk register items are meant for things that are going to persist in their remediation, at least efforts, for more than 2 quarters. And then share the high-level goals in the plan. Execution. This is where a lot of people fall down. Some people are really good at planning and documenting, and then nothing happens. Why? Because you wrote a bunch of documents, but it's just like, that baseball movie. If you build it, they will come. No. If you document it, they will read it. No. It'll just sit there unread. You have to bring it into life. You have to bring it into process. You have to implement the roadmap. You have to deliver the mitigations. You have to get that stakeholder management buy-in. Communicate with everyone, like every month almost, or even more often sometimes, certainly during an incident. Implement automated systems that can deliver some of that low-hanging fruit and get rid of some of that friction, right? Those are your quick, impactful wins you can, book on your, and that's certainly something I did at the healthcare startup. Start with high priority policy creation. Make sure that everyone knows what they're supposed to be adhering to and, supporting. Recommend some products and tools. It could be build or buy. It could be open source. It could be commercial. Set a cadence for external scanning and reporting. And this is where really the wisdom of this 5-step plan from PSA, Power PSA, and Synomi comes in. A lot of these things do not show up in other people's analysis of onboarding and starting your job as a fractional CISO or as a full-time CISO. Continuously manage and adjust your remediation plans. Don't just set and forget and then miss it, in a quarter when you check back and say, oh, yeah, all these things didn't get to happen because the priorities, our password vault vendor might have been LastPass, they got breached. You want to switch it to 1Password. These are the things that I had to do as well, in the past. And those are, again, quick wins and risk mitigations that you can agree on and do quickly and show execution and bias to execution. Then report, validate the effectiveness and plan, and the alignment of your plans. Measure that success. Craft detailed reports for management. Craft high-level reports for upper management. Communicate progress at least once a month. Integrate reporting into your overall plan. Conduct an additional risk assessment 3 to 4 months later to show the delta, to show that you've actually moved the needle, reassess and readjust. And then, of course, for my 100 days, this is not in chronological order, but start a wiki, start an intranet, start a Jira project or 2. Why? Jira is documentation. Document all the work that you're doing. Show it as priorities. Give it, points, right, to show the quantity of work that you're doing. Make it a habit. Make it an instinct. Infect others and explain why we document things. It's not just to cover your ass. It's also for those that come later, right, to make sure that they know what criteria were there and what was involved in deciding to leave, Carbon Black and use a tool like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne. Create a SOC, right? A security operations center. And I always outsource it. Nobody has, in general, the resources to do this internally, and you need observability ASAP. So if you don't have a security operations center, purchase one from a third party like Expel or something like that. Excise the most painful element of security friction. That's a quick win. It's a public win, right? It's a win-win. It makes life better for you and for the users, and it shows your bias, right, towards real improvements. Set up an ORC, Operational Risk Committee. This is going to be your risk register. Why? Because your risk register needs a cross-functional audience. It needs to build rapport. You build rapport by having a monthly ORC. And if you have nothing to discuss, then cancel it, but at least schedule it, get everyone into it, invite legal, HR, engineering, marketing, whoever else needs to be there. Decom 2 tools to buy a new one. Remain on budget and budget neutral by finding something that's like a 0.01 level maturity. Think of LIFO here, last in, first out. You might have seen some tool that they bought that's not really been implemented. Get rid of it and use, do that to 2 tools to pay for a good new one that you're actually going to implement to like a 1.0 or a 2.0 level maturity. Then propose the budget for the next 12 months and really try to get ahead of your expected spend, right? Set expectations, draw a line around certain headcount linked costs, because you have no choice, right? If you need to have, a G Suite subscription for every user and, for every developer, you need a GitHub subscription. That's not a budget item that you can decide to shrink or grow. It's just a fixed cost. So make sure you have 2 different buckets, right? Discretionary budget versus like sort of headcount driven budget. Deliver board level metrics, show the risks, show the delays, show the wins, be consistent in your format and messaging. You could do a whole talk on how to message the board. Empower your team through delegation and trust. You're fractional if you're a virtual CISO. You cannot and are not there every day. You must convert your team into leaders and influencers to have them act like owners, have them act like the CISO. Treat them like peers, not delegates. Celebrate their success and message monthly. And I'm talking about we and us here, right? Not I and me. Surface the champions and other departments that have helped and sing their praises, not yours. And then KPIs, here's a couple examples. I like to trend the number of Windows devices towards 0. That helps me sleep well at night. If you were a part of the CrowdStrike Windows outage, and I put the word Windows in there on purpose because Windows had something to do with it. Very fragile operating system. Deliver 40 points of InfoSec projects per sprint, right? Show that you're, or maybe 20, depends on how much team you have. Keep InfoSec response time, to escalated SOC alerts under an hour. A good OKR is to partner with legal to automate contract management, for example, so that you know what are the notification requirements, if there's a breach, third-party risk, that kind of thing. Achieve more reports than fails on your monthly phishing tests. That's a good OKR to throw out. Why? Because at first it can seem difficult to write OKRs. And if you haven't heard the abbreviation before, it's called objectives and key results. And those are two different things that you put into your OKRs. It's hard to do it sometimes for InfoSec because our work is event-driven. It's rooted in non-functional requirements, right? Like availability, security, availability, integrity. So we can't really participate in revenue-based OKRs that are usually cascaded down from the sales and marketing teams at the top of the org chart. But we can, however, write quarterly OKRs that support building customer trust, delivering best-in-class services, and contributing to excellent user experiences. So with that, we've hit 101. This is the final slide. It brings us all to this triumphant butterfly phase. If you'd like a copy of these slides and all the hyperlinks that I promised, feel free to point it. This is a mail to link, and it will just generate an email towards me asking for a copy of this deck. So here we are at the end of the hour. Happy to entertain any questions, thoughts, comments for those of you that are here. And if you're on a recording, feel free to email them to me later. You can come off mute and say, woohoo, or depends on how you thought I did with this difficult but interesting topic.
No, it's very great information. Very well done.
Thank you, Russ. Anyone else want to share your thoughts before we wrap it up or ask a question?
Yeah, Mike, I came here for one thing and I got so much more. I certainly appreciate the resources in the back half, which is the title of your talk. But the front half of this presentation, I think, should be, you could pull that out and rebrand it. So you want to be a CISO. I think there's a real appetite for this kind of like, what does it mean to be a CISO? I mean, I think you encapsulated that really well. Beautifully done.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Flattery will get you everywhere. But I do believe that I've been doing this long enough, and I am a pretty good turn of phrase, with my analogies and metaphors. That's my superpower, I like to say. And I like to bring those analogies and metaphors to explain to people how this stuff works, what's the nature of risk, and think about it philosophically. I have 2 degrees in philosophy. Computers is just my hobby. But I appreciate the fact that you got something unexpected out of this, Jay. And yeah, I could totally break this out into like 3 different lectures and topics, but I crammed it all together and say, this is what it's like, have a plan. This is what my plan was like. And these are some of my experiences.
I mean, shoot, even if you put it in your LinkedIn, there's people on my teams that I'd like to point who I know will be a CISO one day and say, these are the things you should be paying attention to early in your career. Just understand, because it helps you chart a path. I think it's really nicely put together.
Cool. Well, I will put the recording out there and people will be able to watch it on demand later. So feel free to be a part of that post-event consumption cycle. Folks that registered that didn't attend, they'll get an automated email, and I'm working on that. The security agency, of course, is in the practice of providing fractional CISOs to small to medium-sized business, municipalities, family offices, ultra high net worth individuals, whatever you need. Because everyone can use this kind of experience. And I know a good 600 to 800 CISOs that are all looking for W-2 job loss mitigation. They all want to have a little bit of side gig here and there. Maybe it's 2 hours a week, maybe it's 20 hours a week, and they want to quit their day job. But there's a lot of demand, I think, and I'm just trying to connect it with the supply of folks that I know that do this and do it well. And that includes, former CISO for Etsy, former global CISO for Disney, Glenn Taylor. He's loving the fact that he got riffed. in some sense, because now he's free. He can work remote, he can do whatever he wants, he can drill down on a specialization again and not have to be responsible for, the house of mouse, the entire set of subsidiaries, and business lines of business. So really, sometimes, getting laid off is a liberation. But in general, it's just jeopardy and fear and unhappiness. And so I'm trying to make it easier for those that do the job of managing security and hiring and understanding CISOs and what we do and how we do it by creating this content. So anyone else? Yeah.
Like, quick question. I think earlier you spoke about the broadness of the responsibilities of the role for the CISO. Like, how do you approach that in like interviews, like where that there's so many broad responsibilities, but maybe you don't have like one or two? Like, how do you satisfy maybe not having direct responsibility for one or two of the elements as part of interviews?
It depends what your learning style is, but you're basically trying to grow out your breadth as an individual and to not be like a pine tree that just grows in one direction. Say, I do EDR, that's my life. And if I can't do EDR anymore, I'll die, right? You want to be more like this, African tree on the savannah that just expands in all 360 degrees and has branches and leaves everywhere, right? That's all the domains. How do you do that? Well, if you're good at self-paced learning, you can go on OpenCourseWare and you can take an MIT class in artificial intelligence and Python coding, and you can apply that to the challenges of automation for your business. And if you need to round out your social skills, then yeah, you're going to have to go do more speaking, maybe do teaching, right? And you'll be awkward and bad at it at first. And that's important. That's part of the process. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there and to learn something new. There's a bit of cleverness that I picked up a few years ago. Experience is what you get when you were expecting something else. So put yourself into a position to be surprised and to be on your back foot, because that's how you gain footing. That's how you gain knowledge in a new subject area and domain. And if you're not good at self-directed, and you're not going to just go and take I've had 12 of my lectures from one of my NYU courses up on YouTube. You can go watch that and round out your experience, through my 32 hours of knowledge sharing in that class. I don't teach that class anymore, so I'm giving it away for free. But if you're not good at doing that self-directed, then maybe some of these courses are useful, right? Where you're having a cohort of other students. NYU has a CISO certificate program. I created a course for it called Threat Intelligence and Cybersecurity Analytics. It's a 6-week standalone and offered for the CIO certification, which is a 9-month program that they do. And it's not too expensive. So if you have someone that will pay the budget, that's awesome, right? Have your company send you for professional education, get a mentor, right? Get someone to talk with, to round out your skills and experience, and put yourself in a position to actually gain real world knowledge, not just book knowledge of that particular domain, right? So maybe go volunteer as a board for a nonprofit and learn about accounting and finance, right? And to do a better job of understanding budget, and not just say, oh, woe is me, I'm a CISO, I don't have enough budget, right? And so you have to learn how to talk the talk to get the respect and to bring the gravitas and the, what do they call it? Executive presence, right? Whatever that means. How do you bring that, right? How do you grow that? How do you command a room and not just devolve into talking about CVSS and vulnerabilities in 0 days? Because everyone else's eyes are going to glaze over and you're not going to be the business leader that you need to. And I think that's where most CISOs need growth and development, is that conversation with, board members. Pretend you're talking to my parents. You're not allowed to talk about anything about side channel power attacks against, encryption algorithms on an ARM chip. That's just not going to work. So hopefully that helps, Paul.
Yep. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Anyone else? I could talk about this stuff forever, obviously, but I will wrap up. Sneha, you came off of camera. What's your question?
So a question would be so you did touch up a little bit on that point about being a BISO and then moving into a CISO, but what happens is it's really difficult to then get in that position, because usually most companies would look for somebody who has been a CISO. And so I'm currently figuring out what would be the best case scenario from a growth perspective, because BISOs are most likely very much focused on driving the technical aspects of security. So be it like software security, product security. There is a compliance focused area, but it's not that much because the central security usually would take care, depends on the setup of different organizations. So I would like some of the advice or experiences which you've been through.
Sure. So take New York City Cyber Command, NYC3. You have Kelly Mohan, I believe it's the right way to pronounce her last name. She's the CISO there, and she has, I think, 3 deputy CISO headcount. One is threat intelligence, another is risk and compliance, and I forget the third one. But I interviewed actually for one of those roles. She's amazing, but she didn't pick me for the threat intelligence, deputy CISO role, because she needed someone that had already, been through like one of the largest remit, for cybersecurity events, in the country, if not the world, which is New York, where you're talking about 200 agencies, you're talking about threat actors, 3 billion events a day coming into their SOC, that kind of thing. So I had all of the right talk the talk and skills, but not at the same level of scale. So what you're going to want to do as a BISO in one org is never expect to be the CISO for that org, because their succession planning is usually going to be pull someone up from outside, right? Either through nepotism, unfortunately, right? Because a lot of this stuff is not posted. And even if it is posted, it's only posted because they have to post it, but they really know who they're going to hire, right? So it's really about networking, connections, and having influence and having eventually someone that gives you that chance. And so you're going to be taking your first CISO role out of a BISO path in another company that's going to be potentially smaller, but you're getting the title in order to, transfer out of what you were doing before and say, I'm going to learn by doing. They're okay with that. And you're going to hire smart people to fill in your subject matter expert gaps. Because remember, you're the coach and you're stepping back. If you're doing this well, you're stepping back from having talent that does the actual work, and you're there to guide them and to mentor them and to help them grow their career path. And so really the level of CISO, it's not an individual contributor that knows how to do all 8 domains of CISO-ness. That's very rare. That's very uncommon, right? I think very highly of myself. I think I've done lots of stuff over the years, but I know people that are better at every single one of those domains than me. People that can talk about process injection and threat hunting and all sorts of techniques of encryption and social engineering and other tools. So try to be clear, I guess, as to what you think your strengths are. Network and reach out. Use LinkedIn. Get a premium subscription. LinkedIn is a great way to talk to people who have the title that you want and have the path that you want to follow. And oftentimes, you're not asking them to mentor you every week, but have that informational sort of introductory conversation and say, I'm just really curious to hear about how you did this. And of course, that's flattering them, but they're going to give you half an hour or something, right? I do this all the time because I want to give back, and I want to encourage anyone who's on this call or watching this recording, email me, message me on LinkedIn. Reach out. I will set up time and I will talk with you and share with you specific examples that can help, because it's not easy, right? And like I said, it's not as healthy of a career choice as it should be. It exacts a pretty big toll.
Yep. Cool. But thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Sure. Anyone else? Ron, I saw you bobbing your head there a little bit. You want to ask a question or make a comment?
Well, I just put a note in the chat, Mike. It's a great presentation, and I came into the CISO role quite, I don't know if I would call it accidentally. I mean, I was aiming for CISO. I started out as RISO, and then became a corporate information security officer during a divestiture. And then the private equity firm that bought us hired me to be their CISO for the companies in their portfolio, including the one that we divested. Mm-hmm. And so, it's a role I'm growing into, but sometimes it feels a little awkward, not being directly responsible for the companies and yet having oversight and compliance responsibility.
Yeah, no, it's an uncomfortable exposure, and a lot of people aren't doing it anymore because they just don't like that balance, right? They're not on the officers and directors and officers of coverage and insurance. There's no guarantee that something bad happens. They won't fail to apply it to your case, right? So there's a
Right.
lot of risk, not a lot of reward. But do join communities, right? We are much more sharing as professionals than like CEOs and CFOs, right? They keep their cards close to their chest. But reach out to me if you're not a part of the CISO society that Jason's and Amherst put together, because that's where you level up, and that's where you have 800 CISOs in a Slack workspace, and we're all sharing information, very organic,
Cool.
very bottom up. And that's where we, birds of a feather, can flock, and you can find resources and help. Other people have already experienced, implementing tools. You don't have to do a POC. You can do a paper-based evaluation based on, the trust that you will develop, with your fellow colleagues there. So I think that's one of our resilience characteristics is our community. Together, of course, we're stronger than we are alone. And I've relied on that network and community. So LinkedIn, not just, to have a big number of followers and connections, but just to be able to see all the smart stuff that other people are commenting on and highlighting and posting. I've got 10,000 connections now. I just hit that milestone recently. When I joined Security Scorecard back in 2020, so that's 4 years ago, I had like 2,000 connections. So I've made it a focus to grow my access and engage with the community of practice. And that's what you need to do as well. Right? You're not fighting this alone. There's a lot of people that can help you out there. A lot of people willing to sit down with you and run through some stuff. Maybe you want to do an NDA if you want to talk specifics about risk. But I think private equity firms are an interesting space. I think of them as like flipping a house, right? In the real estate market, right? 2-3 years, they want to sell it, right? How long do they hold? Right now, capital is very expensive. So they're holding for like 5 years, 7 years now. But really, they don't want to know if there's radon in the basement and asbestos in the paint, or walls and, 5 roofs on the building. They want to do what I call skin deep security, right? They want to do just enough to get through due diligence.
Yeah.
But don't show me those skeletons in the closet, because that's going to derail the deal, right? So
It may cost money to fix.
exactly, right. So it's a special art of not necessarily cosmetic surgery, but you're certainly not going in and fixing someone's spine, right, for a portco. But there's plenty of folks out there that are advising in that space and have the exact same kind of challenges and balancing act that you have to pursue. So again, don't think that you're alone. Seek community, seek connection, and you will find it and you will benefit from it.
Very good. Thank you, Mike.
Cool, thanks. All right, so now we're 17 minutes after. I think I'll probably hit stop on the recording, and then I will publish this and make it available to the world that didn't join today. But thank you all for enjoying my suffering, if in some cases, my commentary. Brian, I got to see you joined as well. Any last comment you want to share?
Very helpful overview. Thank you, Mike. I have because of all the food for thought that you gave us, I have a lot of questions that we don't have time for here, but I'll look forward to connecting with you later.
Cool. What's your number one question?
As I think about the journey, decision points, vCISO, CISO, going back to a different role in a corporate environment, really, it's considering all the different types of vCISO that you outlined, all the different skill sets that you need to be successful as a CISO or vCISO, and then thinking about the needs of different sizes of companies. I feel like there's some sort of graph that should indicate the smaller the company, the more they need these type of skills, and the larger the company, the more they need these types of skills. And depending on what you want to do as a vCISO, here are some initial areas to focus on, ensuring that you beef up skills you may not have for the target market that you're looking for. So I'm kind of thinking through that.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like that. I can visualize like this sort of 100% of everything map of the domains. And then as you talk to a company, you change the shape and size and importance of certain domains based on industry. And then the actual DNA of that company itself. How long has it been around? Do they have a good security culture? Do they have a bad security culture? And then you would have natural enlarging and shrinking of certain skills. Like threat intelligence is going to be a luxury item for most companies, right? They just don't have the resources to have a threat intelligence team. And so you're going to outsource that. But when you do build or buy or insource, or focus as a priority or not, it'd be interesting to take like 10 companies, and just plot it out and just, have a discussion and say, okay, Let's say you're a major telco. This is an example that might be close to home, right? What are the pathologies that most manifest in a major telco, right? In America versus South America, geography plays a big deal as well. What are the usage patterns of the people? How much data they put on the devices? How much identity could be compromised in the company? How many records of PHI if it's healthcare? So I think that'd be a great discussion. Feel free to book time and chat about some more, just to sort of figure out what emerges if we did a walkthrough of 10 companies and we said, okay, what do you think the vCISO or CISO focus will be for them right now, right? Because it could be different in 5 years, it could be different in 6 months, but learning the principles of what makes something big and what makes something small would be really useful, I think.
Yep, thank you.
All right, cool. All right, so with that, I will stop the share and I will stop the recording. All right, so thanks everyone. And like I said, my LinkedIn connection, feel free to reach out and say hi. If we're not already connected, many of us are, tell your friends, tell your business colleagues. CISOs and vCISOs is a profession. It's a serious profession. We have lots of talent out there looking for interesting, meaningful work. And if we just share, those opportunities and these, resources that we're connected with, we will make our economy and our society and our businesses, much more resilient.